someone I know for a long time because we've been collaborating in other projects in the past, who is working at the INED here, which is the National Institute of Demographic and Statistics here in France. And he's been working on questions related to this conference, questions of race and questions of identity, etc., in relation to the production of data here in France, and many other issues. So I want to welcome Patrick Simon, who is going to talk today about the Muslims. Yeah, oh, great, good. So go for it. Okay. Great.
Thank you, Rahman, for your introduction. You're going to do that for all the panelists?
Yeah, hopefully I'll do that.
So I'm going to give the paper in English, but my English is pretty easy to understand by French speakers. So I think it's not a major problem. So I'll try to do briefly to discuss one very specific point about discrimination against Muslims in France, using the findings of a survey that we have done 4 years ago now, almost 4 years ago, 3 years ago. And what I want to do with this survey is to first give some information about what we know about discrimination based on religion or discrimination against people defined as Muslims, which is not exactly the same thing. The experience of discrimination of the Muslim population in France, and I will try to ask myself and yourself, how can we disentangle which is related to ethnicity or race and what is related to religion? Because of this conflation, which is impossible to overcome somehow, between these two different dimensions of identity. Even though there is a trend to shift from a previous perception or representation of the minorities based on ethnicity, on race, to a new perception which is based on religion, which is quite a recent evolution. The social character of the Muslim, but I think people on this table and this morning have been more able to talk about that before I do. So this raise in the identification of the population by religion is changing somehow how we can understand the process of discrimination. It's still a puzzle, at least for me. So I try to go in this puzzle. So that's a bit a long story. So first, to give some ideas about who we are talking about. So the data on religious affiliation in France in 2009 says different things. First, that is non-religious affiliated people are almost the majority in the French population. Almost 15% of respondents do say that they don't have a religious affiliation. It varies across groups. As you see, it's categories which is based on immigration, linked to immigration over generation. So I won't go too much in detail on that, to be brief. And then, of course, the composition of the population regarding the different religious affiliation maybe is shifting over time. And as you see, Muslims make up almost half of the immigrant population. It's still a significant component of the second generation. It's a small numbers of those who do have a mixed parentage, those who do have an immigrant parent and a French parent, and it's a small group in the mainstream population. So it has variation across groups, and you should keep that in mind when I will browse further on the different data that we show. So second information that the Muslim population is a very socially selected population. Socially selected in terms of the link to immigration, as we have seen. Those who can be defined as Muslim today are mostly immigrants, 55%, 54%, or belonging to the second generation, which means that the share of those who are Muslims in the majority population is still small. 7% of the Muslims are coming from, are not related to immigration in two generations. Okay. As for the ethnic background, 70% of those who define themselves as Muslim have an Arab background. North Africa, mostly, but also Middle East, which is a small number compared to US in France. 9% are Turks and 10% are Sub-Saharan African. So basically the description of the Muslim population is describing predominantly North African Muslims. It's still a young population, and the socio-economic profile is still pretty much polarized on the workers, blue collar and clerks, and a sizable inactive population, predominantly of course women in this case. And there's a sizable low level of education. 47% of the Muslim population do not have more than a low secondary level, which means that they have a diploma you reach at the age of 14, 15. Compared to 18% on average in the general population, but there are also a sizable educated population. 23% do have a tertiary education. So the two ends of the education stratification are there. So it's pretty hard to have an homogeneous representation of the population. So we ask, how do you identify yourself? And we gave a lot of different type of dimensions that you could pick. Religion is not perceived as a very, for most of the population, as a very important marker for your identity, except for two groups, which are the Jews. 45% who define themselves as Jews would say that religion is a very important dimension of their identity. And for the Muslims, it's 30%. If you compare to the Catholics, who define themselves as Catholics, only 5% who talk about identity as an important part of their identity. So the role of the religion itself is quite different between groups. This quotation of religion as an important factor is higher among immigrants than in the mainstream population for sure, and it's higher among Turks and Arabs compared to Sub-Saharan African, Muslim Sub-Saharan African. Sub-Saharan African would be more eager to talk about skin color or national background rather than religion as an important identity, which is reflecting somehow that in the French debate, more or less, blacks are not perceived or defined as Muslims, which is really focusing on North African and less on Sub-Saharan Africa. So, moving to some elements regarding the social exclusion, and this is one of the indicators that we could use is unemployment, and you see that unemployment, there are three categories: those who do not have a religion, Christians, and Muslims. And as you see that there is a striking gap of in unemployment, which accounts also for the social profile I was talking about before. Muslims do have twice more unemployment. This is true for less true for immigrants, and it's more true for the second generation. So there is an increasing gap among the second generation compared to the immigrants. But it has also to do with the ethnicity, as I said before, and it's complicated to say that it's because they are Muslim that they do face unemployment. It's also because they are blacks or they are Arabs. And as you see, blacks, Muslims do have also a higher level of unemployment than blacks who do not have a religious affiliation. And for the Arabs, it's pretty similar. So Christians are not a sizable group in the French context, conversely to the US context, I would say. So there is something behind unemployment which refer to a potential discrimination. And when we try to see what kind of role play religion as an information on discrimination, we find a significant contribution of religion controlling by education, socio-economic position, age, family status, and different kind of information. So there is something which is related to religion, which is still there, but which is pretty much intersected with the ethnicity. So putting religion and ethnicity together somehow neutralize the specific effect of religion when it comes to the unemployment. So it's hard to say that there is a specific discrimination based on religion using these data. So as you see, the relative risk of unemployment controlling for the different information, including religion, you see that basically Sub-Saharan African and North African are more exposed to unemployment, even though they got the credentials, the experience, and the different characteristics that would put them on the labor market, well, on the same situation that the majority population. Reversely, but I will not develop this point, European immigrants on second generation are more comparable to the majority population, or even got an advantage when you see this. When you see this information, the bodies do have easier access to employment compared to the majority population, controlling for the other information. So these are odds ratio. I don't know if you're familiar with this kind of statistical representation, but just get in mind that on the right side, it means that you have a higher risk of unemployment. On the left side, you have a lower risk of unemployment, and when it's white, it doesn't have any significance, and when it's you got the color, it means it's significantly above or below. Okay, so a specific mention about Muslim women wearing a veil, because we did have the information in the survey, and we tried to see what kind of consequences it had. We would expect, considering the debate, the French debate on the veil, on the kind of information we have about hostility, hostile attitudes, and even more in streets against women wearing veil, and the restriction on the labor market that could occur, specifically on the public labor market, that there are huge discrimination. So first, what we see is that 22% of Muslim women which are immigrants do declare wearing a veil in everyday life, and 13% of the second generation. So there is somehow a decline, which is a bit counterintuitive, considering the debate that the second generation would be more actively somehow wearing a veil compared to their mother, which is partly well said in the public debate, which is not exactly seen in the data. The second thing that wearing a veil is really associated with non-participation to the labor market. So there is a strong withdrawal from the labor market. As you see, 82% of Muslim women wearing a veil. 41% of the Muslim women wearing a veil are participating to the labor market, compared to 82% of those who do not, which are Muslim but do not wearing a veil. So there is a huge difference on the attitudes toward the labor market, which could be explained by they anticipate discrimination or restriction on the labor market. They don't try to go in, or simply they're not the kind of gender roles and participation in their social life put them at odds to participate. So there are different kind of explanations. But they have a similar unemployment rate, which is somehow not confirming the idea that they would be more discriminated on the labor market. They have the same level of unemployment. And if we try to see, ask a question on do you experience discrimination, women wearing a veil do not say more than the others that they experience discrimination. So that was somehow unexpected in my case. I would expect that they would complain more about discrimination, but that's not what they say. Okay. So I'll skip this one. So we do have also information on residential segregation. And I want to go on the bulk of the discussion, and I will go very fast on this, on the experience of what I call othering and discrimination. So what happened? What can we see about the negative experience of Muslim population in the French context? So we got 4 indicators here. The first one is the experience of discrimination, self-reported. Have you been discriminated against? And they say yes. The second one is the experience of racism. Have you experienced attitudes, violent attitudes, insults, hostile attitude in everyday life? The third one is othering, which is based on the question about how often people ask you about where you come from, which could be somehow a mild hostile attitude. It's not an hostile attitude, it's simply an interest, which is a curiosity, which is repeated day after day, gives you the sense that you're not really somebody from here, because everybody always puts you in the situation to be an outsider. And the fourth one is we ask to people not only do you feel French, which was one of the questions, but the second one, do you think the others see you as French? So we call denial of Frenchness when people say no, people do not see me as French, even though they do perceive, they do define themselves as French as such. So you see that on these 4 different indicators, Muslims are very often among the immigrants on second generation popping out, which means they seem to have a specific experience, especially on the denial of Frenchness. Muslims are not perceived as one of us in the French society. They are put aside. So just go in the experience of discrimination, what we see, which is whatever the kind of grounds for discrimination, including sex, sexual orientation, health, age, ethnicity, religion. On all grounds, there is a higher level of self-reported discrimination among the second generation compared to the immigrants, which are higher compared to the majority population you would expect. And you have the usual suspects, Sub-Saharan African, overseas French from overseas departments, so blacks, and North Africans, Turks, and a bit lower Southeast Asians, which are more talking about discrimination. If we control by different information, what you see is this. Yeah. Wow, that's smart. You see that Muslims, compared to the other religious group or non-religious group, do complain more, report more discrimination, everything being controlled, which means among the Algerians, the Moroccans, the Sub-Saharians, those who define themselves as Muslims do talk more about discrimination than the others. And when I say the others, it's something like a split between 20% of non-religious affiliated among the North Africans to 80% who declare a religion. So there is something specific about the religion, it seems, which is not only tied, discrimination is not only explained by ethnic background. There is something happening, we don't know exactly what, but it's happening on religion. And the fact is, we ask, when they say that they have been discriminated against, what would the main ground that they think they have been discriminated against? And a very few numbers of them do talk about religion as such. So Muslims say they have been discriminated more often than the others, but they don't talk about religion as the ground of discrimination. It's still perceived as related to ethnicity or race. So, second element about the ethnic ascription, what I said about the othering and Frenchness denied. What we see across generation is that we would expect that this otherness is decreasing over time, over generation, because there is this type of incorporation inside the mainstream population, which is not occurring for the blacks. That's the pink line above. You see that it's totally flat. You could be an immigrant just arriving for 2 months, or you could be living, the third generation living in France. It's exactly the same experience of people asking you, where do you come from? So it seems that the incorporation of blacks as full members and, I would say, casual members of the French society is not still occurring. So there is still this distance which is based. And you see that for the Asians, it's also pretty flat. Well, there's some variation because of the size of the sample. Maghrebins as well. So it seems that conversely to the Europeans, which are declining very sharply after the first generation, they are still perceived differently. French denied is declining a bit, but still pretty high, even for those who do have a mixed parentage. So there is something which is attached to the perception of otherness, which is related to what I would call visible markers. Visible markers could be skin color, could be name, or could be religious markers, which are to tell beyond wearing a veil. I mean, how do people decode Muslims in social life is a bit tricky. And I will end up with the, no, I have? Okay, no, I will end up with that. I will talk later about the rest if you have questions. And a characteristic attached to the experience of racism. So again, on racism, as you have seen, that we have seen a higher level of experience of racism for Muslims compared to the others. And we ask for which ground or which reason you think you have been exposed to racism, and we get different options, including your name, your skin color, your accent, your origin, and your religion. And you see the findings here. Again, we have Jews who talk a lot about religion as a negative experience in social life. Less Muslims. You see there is a striking difference. When Muslim has been exposed to racism, when they talk about racism, they're not linking racism to their religion. So it's still, maybe it will change. I mean, it's 2009, I don't know. Considering the climate these days, maybe that will evolve through time. We should review the same questions next year just to see if it has changed. But at least at this stage, you see that the name or the origins are silent markers that have been related to racism in the case of Muslim population. Of course, skin color is pretty much referred to by blacks, which is not a surprise, but 91% of blacks say that they have been exposed to racism because of skin color, which is still sizable for the Arabs, 44%, which still also a bit significant for the white immigrants, who say they have been exposed to racism because of skin color. So we have a full debate in France about racism against white people, which is an ongoing debate. I won't go in this, but to wrap up the discussion, I would say that even though ethnicity and religion are clearly intertwined so intimately that it's pretty hard to make to depart themselves, still we see that there is something on religion which is significant on the experience of discrimination, the self-reported experience of discrimination, which is not confirmed by the analysis of unemployment. So it seems that religion is perceived by Muslims as a factor of discrimination, not religion per se, but as Muslims they think they are discriminated more often than the others. So there is something complicated to get there. But in the at least unemployment part of it, it's not obvious that there is something specific attached to this. So I would have expected that the woman wearing a veil would be a good example of the negative experience on the labor market. And as you see, it's not absolutely clear what is happening. There is a self-selection process of women wearing a veil on the labor market that makes it complicated to get sort of way the system of restriction in the public space is made as such that people do not even try somehow. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.